we have big news coming from the Georgia Supreme Court to bring you. Justin Ross Harris's murder conviction was overturned earlier today by the Georgia Supreme Court. Now, Harris was originally convicted of murder for leaving his 22-month-old son Cooper in his car, where he suffocated to death back in June of 2014. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Now, this was actually the first trial that we ever covered here on Law and Crime. Harris claimed that his son's death was an accident and that he usually dropped his son off at daycare before heading to Home Depot where he worked, but Cooper, he says, was asleep that day and Harris simply forgot that he was in the back seat. Now, the state believed that his actions were purposeful, and they argued that Harris wanted to be free from his burden of being a parent so that he could pursue sexual relationships with other women. Well, it was ultimately decided that Harris did not receive a fair trial because evidence of his sexual affairs with underage women should not have been admitted, according to the court. Harris is now entitled to a new trial on the murder charge. Now, before I bring in my panel to talk about it, I want to go back to the hearing where the defense motioned to overturn the conviction. Take a look.
Good day. My name again is Mitch Durham. I'm here on behalf of Justin Ross Harris. As the court's aware, we filed a brief that listed 8 enumerations of error. We're prepared today to try and answer any questions you may have on those issues. But unless otherwise directed, I'm going to begin focusing on the issues regarding severance, the prior bad acts, and admission for 403. And then, as time permits, I may move to issues regarding cross-examination and other matters. And also, I will say up front, I hope to be able to reserve a few moments for rebuttal. Now, regarding the motion to sever and the admission of the prior acts, our submission is the trial court erred in allowing this mountain of evidence to come in during the trial. It was not intrinsic. It was not relevant under any purposes, whether it be for intrinsic purposes or whether it be for 404B purposes. The sexual messaging acts did not make it more probable that Mr. Harris would intentionally kill his child. The case was actually indicted with another incident involving improper sexual contact with a minor, and they were not on the same dates. The dates alleged in the indictment were days and months prior to the June 18th date when Cooper was tragically killed. The state also sought and was allowed to introduce evidence dating back several months, a year and a half or more, at the trial to try to show that appellant was motivated or planned to kill his child intentionally so he would be free to continue doing the sexual messaging acts. We don't believe, and we have submitted that.
Mr. Durham,
Yes.
the severance argument and the 404B argument to some extent are interrelated, right? Because the judge's conclusion that severance wasn't warranted was based significantly on the idea that the evidence related to those sex charges was going to come in anyway under the murder charges.
All right, so Janine, first let's start. Was this the right decision by the court to overturn his conviction on the grounds that that evidence should never have been allowed in?
Well, this is kind of a double-edged sword, Jesse, because, I understand what they're saying because it was like highly, highly prejudicial. The jury looks at him and sees what he would do with a minor and just decides he is a repulsive, morally reprehensible person and that he could do this. And the justices said that, look, the evidence about whether he killed his child was not very overwhelming. It was the rest of this that pretty much guided them. But on the other hand, they were putting forth that evidence because that was his motive. He didn't want to be married. He was having all these extramarital affairs with all these different women, and he just wanted to live his single life. So they had to get some of that in. I think, though, maybe it was wrong to put in the stuff with the minor. They had other stuff that they could have put in to show that that was his motive.
Okay, so now you think, Joe, what a new trial will look like without this evidence. Walk me through if you think it's strong enough to convict him. I mean, just off the top of my head, you can look at the surveillance footage where he goes back to the car after lunch. How does he not observe his son in the car? And it makes a question of, was this a guy who intentionally left his child in that car?
Right. I mean, there's still something there to convict. I think that perhaps the conviction potentially comes in at a lower level than before, because at the level that they convicted before, he ended up getting life in prison. So at the same time, they didn't want to go this route, and that's why they went the route that they did, got the evidence that they got in, because they wanted his volition to be so clear, his intention to be so clear, and his motivation to be so clear that he does get, life in prison. So it's not to say that they can't convict, and it certainly looks bad that he comes back out to the car, right? How can there not be at least recklessness, or
Right.
if not something arising to a larger level there? So they can convict, they can go along this route. I don't know if they convict at the same level they did before, and they didn't want to do that, but that's where they are now.
And we have actually a Prime Crime episode dedicated to this. You can see some of the evidence, how it played out in court. I should tell you that his convictions regarding messaging an underage girl, those convictions still uphold, but this is a whole big development here with the murder charge.